So good morning and welcome, and we're very excited to be in this home stretch toward opening the museum in a couple of weeks. And you'll be seeing a fair amount of completed spaces. Not quite everything is complete, but most of the galleries are installed with a couple of small exceptions. So you'll see a fair majority of the collection on view. And obviously you'll see buildings largely completed and ready for opening. Again, with a couple of exceptions where we're fine-tuning and finishing up some spaces. And I think you'll enjoy what you see. So we'll open it up for questions. Alice, do you have anything to begin with?
No, I wish we had water in the lakes, but we'll have that in due time.
In due time.
We have, I can't believe we've gotten so close and gotten to where we are, but we just said what the good Lord allows us to get done, we're going to get done, and we are here for the 11th, so.
Well, I'll go ahead. What percentage you say is currently complete of the museum as of this day?
Of construction or of art installation? Construction, all but the finish work in the Great Hall, which is the auditorium. So they're putting in the floors this week, the wood floors, and doing the ceiling and that sort of thing. So that's pretty much it. And I would say that's probably 98 to 99%.
Yeah, there's still a lot of groundwork being done out here and also these.
Yeah, the landscaping work is probably 95% complete. And Ms. Walton already mentioned that the ponds, the complex layering of the liner system takes quite a while to do, and we've had some weather interruptions in that, so we're a little bit further behind than we hope to be. But again, barring any unforeseen weather incidents, we'll have water in the ponds very soon.
By the time
Yes, that's the goal.
Is it accurate to say people are working literally day and night?
That's pretty accurate.
It is very accurate. Hiked over on the trails yesterday, and there were way too many cars in the parking lot.
Way too few, according to me.
Ms. Walton, talk about the excitement that this dream of yours is so close to reality.
You know, it's hard to believe, really. People ask if I knew what I was getting into when we started this, and I guess my answer would be no. It's been an amazing journey, and you know, there is not, to my knowledge, a book on how to build a museum.
We might write
I don't know, but it's just been a great adventure of learning and you know, making the best decisions you can make at a jillion steps along the way. You know, running into all sorts of surprises from the Ozark caves underneath the site to our many springs that like to erupt when and where they want. So but I wouldn't trade it for anything. It has the team that is Crystal Bridges, Don, Sandy, Matt, Rod. It is absolutely amazing, the group of people that have come together and the way people so believe in what we're doing and in the mission. And that makes it all.
What do you think your response will be in 2.5 weeks on 11/11/11 when the doors are open and the public gets to see the vision?
My favorite thing is to watch people see the art and react to the art, and I just cannot wait. And I've been caught with tears in my eyes several times already now, watching people and seeing, you know, how they react. But that means the most.
When you first started this project, you must have had some idea of what the collection might be like. How does that compare now that the collection is here?
It's been a process, you know. I wouldn't say that I knew where we were going. It's been a long road, hasn't it, Don? I mean, a curvy one. It's taken all sorts of twists. And in my own life, the reason I wanted to build Crystal Bridges and to create it is because art has meant so much in my life. And the process of reading about it and learning about it and social and cultural changes, you know, that occurred along the way, are what has been a great joy in my life, and the thing that I really want to share with other people that we want to share.
Some of your acquisitions are very well known. I wonder if you talk a little bit about the surprises and some of the maybe the lesser known pieces that you just are so excited about having found.
Can I answer that one?
You do that one.
I think one of the great pleasures of the work that we all do in museums is to both tell the stories that we know about art history. Many of us know the milestones, the great icons of art practice. Some of the great images that were made in American art history are here. And so sharing those and connecting the dots, so to speak, of telling the American history through its great art is one of the pleasures of any museum. But there's another pleasure for those of us who work in the field, which is the kind of detective work and the sense of discovery when we do additional research, new research on the history of art in this country, and we find sometimes marginalized stories or stories that haven't been told well in the mainstream, and we're able to identify them, identify the great works of art that are by untold masters. And the history is always being rewritten and being revised. And so for us to participate in that and to reveal for our publics, our visitors, some really extraordinary, until now hidden stories is a great joy. And we have discovered some extraordinary stories in the history of American art, in the history of world art that took place on these shores, and are finding ways to integrate those back into the mainstream. So I think our guests will see both what they expect in terms of American art history and some things that will be a complete revelation and surprise. And I think that's one of the great treats of this collection.
Can you talk specifically, though, about one or two of those?
Janet.
Sure, tell our favorites. I do. Just as a for instance, and there are many of these stories, one of the themes that you'll see as you walk through the galleries, there are wonderful sub-themes that develop as you walk through the Crystal Bridges collection, one of which is the important role that women have played in the history of this country's arts. It's a story that isn't well told. It wasn't historically well told. It wasn't maybe historically well known. And so I think because we're a museum of the 21st century, we've been able to avail ourselves of newer research and new scholarship about the role of women. So what you'll see is a very strong history of the presence of women both as patrons of the arts, also as subjects for artists, and indeed as makers of art, some of the great female artists of our nation's history. And one of them is an artist that we have in some depth, an artist named Janet Sobel. Sobel was a Ukrainian immigrant who came to this country in the 1920s and relocated, raised a family, was really what would have been called a housewife in the mid-20th century, working in Brooklyn in her living room, on the floor of her living room, in fact, with her son's school art materials that he brought home from school. And she worked in the shadow of New York City. She would get into the galleries and see what was going on, but she was not a player in that American art scene of the mid-century. And yet, by the early 1940s, she had found a way to develop a style that was really at the cutting edge, at the forefront of art anywhere in the world, in her living room in Brooklyn. And in 1945, I think it was, Peggy Guggenheim, who had this great gallery called Art of the Century, gave her an exhibition in New York, and it was a revelation. It was this this person who had been working in her living room, being thrust onto the main stage of American art in the most progressive gallery in the country. And Clement Greenberg, who was probably the most important critic of the 20th century, took Jackson Pollock, then a very young but important up-and-coming painter, to see this exhibition. And they both declared that this was the most progressive, most modern painting they'd ever seen. Well, it happened that Janet Sobel had developed a technique of dripping paint, pouring paint on a canvas on the floor, which impressed Pollock so much that by the next year, Pollock was painting his own drip paintings. Now, Pollock went on to become, as Life magazine called him, the most important artist of the 20th century, and yet no one tells the story of where that inspiration came from for that great breakthrough in art history, that of the poured paint, the drip paint style. And Sobel got relegated then to the bywaters or the footnotes of American art history, when in fact she played perhaps a very important pivotal role in the development of American art. So to be able to show her work in a gallery with Jackson Pollock and show her work with some of the great achievements that she made in her living room is really, I think, an update of the story of American art that we all don't share yet, and I think we certainly should.
Ms. Walton, could you talk about where your love for art came from? You talked
we would take off on family camping trips. My dad would take a month off every summer and load the 4 kids and the dog and the canoe in the homemade camping trailer, and we'd camp in national parks in various parts of the country each year. And I always took my charcoals and my watercolors with me and painted the landscapes. So it goes way back. My claim to fame was honorable mention in the 4th grade. So I'm truly an amateur.
Was that here in Bentonville?
Bentonville Junior grade school, I guess, Bentonville grade school. And but I always loved it, and I've always loved history, American history in particular. So it was really I started collecting regional art, potters. We have wonderful craftsmen in this part of the world, as a lot of you know. Basket makers, pottery, art, charcoals, pastels. And so I collected regional artists, usually with a landscape or an environmental bent. And I started reading a little more on the national scene to try to get a history of the background of art, because I really didn't have any from growing up. We just didn't have museums available. And it's when I started reading the art history books, and then began in the early 90s probably collecting some more nationally known names, recognized names. But it's when I started reading the art history books that things really, the picture got painted, I guess you might say. And I just fell in love with it, and it has been my hobby for the past 20 years.
Is that kind of why it's so important to you to have this here, because you didn't grow up with museums here, so the kids growing up here in Northwest Arkansas can have somewhere to go to appreciate art?
I think we all want to give something from the heart if we're going to give, and this part of the world means a great deal to me. I love it here. I grew up here, and I want people to have something that we didn't have when I was growing up, and have access to that art education in a different way of learning and looking at things, because I really believe that art truly brings that to the educational realm.
In this process, what has been the biggest surprise of all in collecting this and just in this huge enterprise?
I got one. One more.
I guess I didn't know, but I never expected people to be so excited. It's not that I didn't expect them to be excited, I've never thought about it. And so to see people so excited about it and so looking forward to it is the greatest delight to me.
We're about to top 5,000 members before we
Oh my
open,
gosh.
which is extraordinary. And just to put that in context, I think I've mentioned this before, the Smithsonian American Art Museum, one of our great peers in Washington, who's been around for quite a while, they have 1,500 members. So before we open, we've more than tripled their level of membership in a much smaller community, in a place where I think not all of us recognize the hunger, the anticipation, the eagerness to connect with great art. So it really is a remarkable testament to that kind of.
And we have over 800 volunteers already. And they have been such a critical part of this whole process. There are art guides, there are trail guides. They'll be teaching environmental lessons out on the trails and identifying trees and flowers.
Library guides.
How to keep the trails healthy. So the volunteer aspect of it that makes me as happy as anything, just to see how people want to participate.
And what role is scholarship going to play in the museum's mission? You mentioned it, kind of alluded to it.
It'll play a great role, and we already, of course, have a very strong connection with our local colleges and universities. The University of Arkansas is a great partner for us, and they are ramping up their history program in very significant ways, and that's a kind of joint arrangement between us and them. We'll also shortly announce a national and international scholars program. We've not yet talked about that, but that will be coming in the next few months, and you'll learn more about seated just adjacent to our library, a 50,000 volume research library, which is not only open to scholars and researchers and people that will come from all over, but to all of our guests. So we hope that everyone, amateur and professional alike, who comes to the museum will avail themselves of the resources of the library, which is a tremendous resource. And of course, as Ms. Walton was describing her own joy in reading about our history and how that precipitated her love of art and then the creation of the museum. Who knows, the next Alice Walton may be growing up today in Northwest Arkansas and come to our library and have the same kind of trajectory.
How many volumes?
Sorry,
How many volumes?
50,000 and growing.
Wednesday, from Dallas' perspective, Ms. Walton, you live outside of Fort Worth, is that right?
I do,
Which area?
near Millsap.
When we were here in spring, you said it was really hard to tell just how many people you might expect to come through the doors in the first year. Now that you have the membership, you have the people getting tickets for the first several weeks. Any idea yet? Any estimate?
We know who's coming in the first couple of weeks. It's overwhelming. It's 10,000 tickets in the first couple of days of ticket availability. So we're prepared, Kyle, for a very large influx of folks, and we're welcoming and we're excited to have them. But we also want to ensure that everyone who comes, one of the reasons we're doing the time ticketing is to make sure that every guest that comes has a really meaningful experience with the art. None of us want the kind of cattle call experience where you can't ever have an interaction with works of art. We want to make sure that everyone can actually connect with the art and spend time with it.
How long will that timed situation be?
We've announced that we'll do the time ticketing through the beginning of 2012, but we may extend it depending on the demand. Again, we just want to make sure that the experience is really positive for folks. We want to accommodate everybody, but we also want to make sure that they have a meaningful experience.
Other new museums and other cultural institutions that have opened in, say, the last decade or so have announced great optimism. Hordes of people are coming, and it's going to be put our place on the map. And do you feel as though your estimates of visitors is conservative or optimistic, and are you prepared for the possibility that like in other institutions, it might not quite get where you are?
Well, just a correction, Steve, we haven't actually announced expectations of visitorship, and our expectation is that every visitor will have a meaningful experience, and that's what our goal is. So it's not about numbers at all for us. We certainly know, to Kyle's question, that there's a great interest and demand, and we want to accommodate that, but we're not dependent on numbers. We want to make sure that people have a meaningful experience. That's our goal. So it's quite different than the examples that I think you're referring to, or alluding to, in that, first of all, our admission is sponsored, so there is no revenue stream from our admission, and that too is about the experience. We want to make the museum accessible. We want to make sure that people have a direct connection with the art and avail themselves of all the communication that's embedded therein.
And I think one of the most important things to me is the repeat visitorship that we have as well from people in the region. I think we can judge and tell the kind of job we're doing by the amount of repeat visitorship we get, and I really hope that's significant. I believe it will be. We've got some really exciting programming.
And that I wholeheartedly agree with that, because we all know, I think, that living with works of art, so to speak, is how they reveal themselves to us. A one-off, drive-by, quick hit visit to a work of art doesn't tell you everything about that work of art, and a painting, a sculpture will really reveal itself over time. I know Ms. Walton has talked about that, living with great works of art, and how over the years the subjects, the style, the artists reveal themselves to you as you engage in a kind of dialogue with a work of art. And our hope certainly is that, especially folks in the region, but nationally, internationally, will come back again and again and enter a relationship with works of art and really get to know them well and get to know the stories embedded in them and all the different facets of a work of art.
For those of us who've grown up in the rural Ozarks, North Arkansas, we know that at times we've been poked fun of, and there is this caricature still that many people outside of the Ozarks, Arkansas, have of the state of the region. Have you thought about the role that this museum will do in dispelling some of those still held stereotypes other places about us?
I have. It's not the primary motivation for the museum at all, but I have and have always had great pride in being from here, and I I hope that Crystal Bridges becomes a part of that increased pride in the region, and you know, as we compare ourselves with other parts of the country.
So what do you think your parents would say as this gets close to opening?
My mother would be thrilled. My daddy would be going, well, this is pretty interesting. But before my mom passed, I was able to bring her down here on the mule, you know, not a real mule, but Kawasaki. And she understood what you know, about the museum, and that meant the world to me, that she knew what we were doing. She was so thrilled. But she is the one, the park we've named in her memory, kind of. And she is the one that wanted to keep and preserve this land, and she always knew we'd do something special with it. She didn't know what. So I know she would be very happy.
In the process of some of your acquisitions, you know, at some points you were met with some resistance as far as some people that want to see their works, leave their, what they thought might have been a bigger metropolitan area to come to Arkansas. What was your reaction to that, and kind of what do you say to those critics?
Well, you know, I think that everyone should take pride in what's done in their region, and I think regional pride is a really strong and good thing. I hope we have it and have more of it here. So I don't have a problem with people believing that they want to keep something, and if they care enough to keep it, then by golly, that's good. I don't have a problem.
There is an element of that goes back to Kyle's question about the sense of place here, and I'll just tell a story about one of the paintings in the collection, a Thomas Moran, magnificent Hudson River School painting from the 19th century, and it was recorded in the literature as being a lost painting. It was known but then disappeared. And what that ultimately meant was that it was hanging in a home in Springdale, Arkansas. So the East Coast establishment didn't recognize that a painting in Arkansas wasn't lost, it was just hanging in a collector's home. And so that painting is now in the museum's collection. It's lived in Northwest Arkansas for now 60 years, but it's now on public view, which is a wonderful thing. And that's something that a museum like this can do, is take works of art that are in private hands and not seen by very many people and make them available to thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people. So it's a great step forward in terms of the availability of art.
This was one of the really exciting finds, you know, that you hope for in a process like this. But the painting was actually behind Harvey and Bernice Jones's sofa, 40-some years.
How did you find it?
One of our great benefactors from Northwest Arkansas.
How did you find it? Did they come to you?
The estate.
The estate was contacted us.
It's been said that this museum, even opening, could be ranked, if you can rank museums in the top 10. Is that pride? Was that a goal? Or is that just a byproduct of passion?
It's a byproduct of passion. I wouldn't know how to rank museums, I don't think, to start with. But I think that I'm so thrilled with the job that Moshe Softy's done with the buildings, and so glad that we didn't mess with his design much. And I wouldn't say that I really knew or had a feel for what it is. I mean, looking at it today from those little drawings on his napkin, I wouldn't tell you that I really knew what to expect. But it's just it's been a great process and a great journey, and I'm thrilled with that we picked Moshe because I love the flexibility that he creates to the design in his buildings. And it didn't matter if it was the National Gallery in Canada in the middle of a city or the Skirball in LA, his buildings always relate to the surroundings. And that was what attracted me to him, and we never actually interviewed anyone else. So, but that's been a big part of it, and a big thrill. I do love the buildings themselves and the galleries, and think he's done a magnificent job.
Another way to answer the ranking question, I agree with Ms. Walton that there is no such ranking system, but when you look at the quality of the collection and how we've really focused on excellence in American art history, I think that puts us in very good company in terms of great American collections in this country. And similarly, in terms of accessibility, one of the goals of the museum is to make that collection as accessible as possible. And many of the stories that we've announced about the museum in terms of the sponsored admission and the educational programs is really to make sure that that collection is available to as broad a population as possible, and importantly, in as educational a way as possible. So I think on all of those measures, we would rank, if there were such a thing, rank very highly. Certainly well respected by colleagues, and that's an important measure.
Did you ever consider putting the museum anyplace else? I mean, in another city?
I always wanted it here, and it took deciding on this location took a while. This was our family land, and really to be the land for the next generation if they want a home or whatever. So it was a big deal, and we spent over a year. Just when I first brought it up, there were a few raised eyebrows, and everybody was wondering what Alice was up to.
Did you consider in town building a...
We looked at some other sites. We talked about other sites, and I think there was some hesitancy on the part of the family originally, because it is the children's, the next generation's land. That's what it was to be. And but they're the ones that in the end made the decision and decided this was important and this was what should be done. So that took a year or so, just going through that process and thinking about it.
When did you first start thinking about building a museum? I mean, what's the time frame?
It's mid-late 90s, somewhere in there. My walls were getting fairly full, and I guess it was to the point in my life where I really wanted to think about what I could do to give back. That was always something my folks spent a lot of time with us on, is how do you give back?
How has the family been involved?
It's been wonderful. It's been a great experience for us as a family. Of course, the endowment was given by the Family Foundation, and almost all my next generation, I call them my nieces and nephews since I don't have any children, but most of them have been on either buying trips or museum tours with us, and as have my brothers. And so it's been a real learning experience. Some of them are starting to have bought a piece here or there, not necessarily tied in with this collection, but have just become interested. So it's been a great learning experience, and it's been a thrill for me to get to spend time with everybody and share.
You mentioned a partnership with the University of Arkansas. Can you talk about potential partnerships existing with some of the other museums in the region, the Gilcrease, the Nelson Atkins in Kansas City? What kinds of things are you doing with them?
To date, before we opened the museum, obviously we've been a very generous lender with our collection. Our collection has been really scattered across the country and indeed around the world. And that's obviously in the service of building relationships between a new museum and existing museums here and abroad. And those relationships continue. They're very collegial. They're very open in terms of dialogue and possibilities going forward. We've not announced any formal relationships yet, but we will be doing so in the coming year. Relationships that will produce exhibitions, will produce collection exchanges and such as that. So you'll be hearing more about that in the months and years to come.
We have time for just one more question.
The permanent exhibit is an historic survey of American art. What do you want? Your dad was a patriot, and you have that patriotism as well. You're very American identified. This is such an American venue. What do you want patrons to come away with in terms of their American identity then?
That's a good question. I've always been a history buff and focused on American history because that's what I love. And I want people to come away, as I understand process of getting to know art and American art. And I feel so much closer to the social currents, the political currents that occurred at various points in time, all the contentious wars and the viewpoints on each side, which, you know, artists love to expound on. But I hope that that's what people bring away is for a sense of the background and the times and the culture and the politics, how this country really came together. Because that's what it's done for me, and that's what really has brought things alive for me.
In our mission statement, we talk about celebrating the American spirit, and all of these, I think, are aspects of that American spirit that are evidenced by the works of art in the collection.
Thank you. I think that's all we have time for.
Thank you all for being with us.
Yes,
Enjoy the
thank you
tour
so
and
much.
look forward to